Hello and welcome. President Muhammadu Buhari meets service chiefs over rising insecurity in some parts of the country, gives assurance of safety of lives and property. Stop violating quarantine guidelines. That's the message from the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 to Nigerian returnees undergoing 14 days mandatory quarantine. Kano State is not leaving anything to chance. Quarantines over 2,000 in Almajiri as more concerns grow over their COVID-19 status. And global COVID-19 death toll passes 300,000, with number of confirmed cases across the world surpassing 4.4 million. Plus, business, sports, news from Abuja, the FCT, and later on news from our studios in London.
On business news, OPEC and China commit to working together to help stabilize global oil market from the impact of COVID-19.
On sports news tonight, International Olympic Committee says it's expecting to bear costs of $800 million for its part in organizing the postponed Tokyo Olympics.
And from Abuja, National Assembly leaders discuss 2020 budget amendment with Finance Minister, asks executive to prioritize interest of Nigerians while promising speedy passage.
The president is giving Nigerians the assurance that he's committed to securing the lives and property of every citizen. President Muhammadu Buhari's assurances were conveyed by the National Security Advisor, Muhammadu, while briefing State House correspondents after a meeting of the National Security Council at the Aso Rock Villa. At the meeting, the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Boss Mustafa, and the National Security Advisor briefed the Council on COVID-19 and the security situation in the country.
Today's meeting basically started with a brief by the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, who, as you know, is the chairman of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19. He gave a comprehensive brief on the gains made so far, highlighting areas of concern, areas which need to be addressed, as well as making projections for the next couple of weeks. I, as the National Security Advisor, presented a couple of memos to Council in relation to the current security challenges faced by Nigeria. And of course, these are issues that revolve around the insurgency in the northeast, armed banditry, emergence of all kinds of groups that are not essentially bona fide. And I also highlighted other issues that are related to the problems of kidnapping, which we notice has been on the increase, and Mr. President is committed to doing whatever is necessary to reduce the spate of violence and insecurity in the country. He is also committed to spending whatever resources he has at his disposal to bring a quick end to all the issues affecting Nigerians and bringing a lot of sorrows to Nigerians.
While the president's assurance of security for all Nigerians is coming at a time when attacks by bandits seem to be on the rise once again, particularly in the northwest, even while the nation battles a fearsome pandemic. In this report, our correspondent Olumide Macaulay takes a look at recent violent incidents in Zamfara, Kaduna and Katsina, then presents the challenge for the nation's security forces.
COVID-19 is ubiquitous in news from states around the country, but that hasn't stopped insecurity from taking an infamous seat on the front burner. Over 100 people were reported killed by bandits in Kaduna, Sabon Birnin village in Igabi local government area in April. In May, gunmen attacked 3 villages in Kajuru local government, leaving no fewer than 8 people dead and many injured in Idalu Makyali and Bakinkogi. It wasn't better in Katsina State, as also in 3 local governments, bandits left 47 persons dead in Dutsimma, Danmusa and Safana. Eliciting a reaction from President Muhammadu Buhari through a statement from his senior special assistant on media and publicity, Garba Shehu, condemning the act and promising it will be met with decisive force. Banditry was also a problem in Zamfara State that led to troops of Operation Hadaran Daji killing 89 bandits and rescuing 5 kidnapped victims. While the Nigerian army and police are responding to maintain law and order against the tide of criminals who defy the curfews imposed because of COVID-19 to perpetrate their crimes, it's simply a matter that must be met with a superior force than it presents itself to promote confidence in government and prevent loss of lives and property. Olumide Macaulay, Channels Television News.
Let's take another look at the rising tension in some parts of the country. Joining me live from Abuja is a security risk management and intelligence specialist, Dr. Kabir Adamu. Thanks a lot for joining us on the news at 10.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. Some of these states where we're beginning to see these attacks again, there was a lockdown, there's a curfew, and security forces mounted different barricades, etc. How can we now be seeing attacks on this scale with all that in place?
No matter how we want to paint it, it's an unfortunate reflection of the weakness of governance. The fact that security agencies are not able to capitalize on the lockdown and ensure that these types of security incidences are nipped in the bud, and of course the perpetrators are arrested, show that governance is weak in these areas, as it were.
In areas like Katsina, we see 3 local governments there being attacked. Now we hear the federal government talk about decisive steps, decisive force. We're trying to control a pandemic. What sort of steps do you think can be taken so that the gains that we're trying to make don't get reversed?
I would like to take us back to December 2019, when the National Security Advisor launched the revised National Security Strategy 2019. At that time, we were promised that there's going to be a paradigm shift from the state-centric approach to security that we've been used to since independence to what the National Security Advisor called this citizen-centered security. And under that, there are different components. One of them would include community policing. So the major challenge has been a lack of implementation of that document. And frankly, I had expected that during today's meeting, we will get a review or some comments by the Office of the National Security Advisor to tell us that this is how far this strategy is being implemented. These are the challenges. This is what the federal government is doing. This is what the state government is doing. Now, that level of implementation has limits for every, state level. At the federal level, you have levels of implementation. At the state level, you have level. Fortunately, we have going past
These are unprecedented times, in terms of health and safety protocols, and we're going to have to do all this implementation you're talking about, and then take on the health and safety protocols. What do you think should be done first in terms of a priority, seeing as we're now going to have to control an unseen enemy and one we can see?
The idea of security has changed. Everything around security involves, of course, national security, food security, health security, and the amazing thing is that all of these are captured in that document. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, frankly. They're all captured in that document. It's all about implementation. So it's about coordination at the federal level, the state level, and then, of course, at the community level. We can, run around this, But frankly, there is nothing but going back to that document and ensuring its implementation. And to that extent, I would like to speak about the monitoring and evaluation that civil society organizations, the media, can also do. When the National Security Advisor was giving his press briefing today, those are the kind of questions I expected even the media to ask him. What have you done in terms of implementation of the document launched in 2019? So the tool is in our hand. It's all about making sure that we use those tools instead of allowing it to gather dust.
All right, Security Risk Management and Intelligence Specialist Dr. Kabiru Adamu, thanks a lot for joining us on the news at 10 tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
The Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 says it's saddened by the conduct of some Nigerian returnees who refuse to comply with the conditions attached to their quarantine at various isolation centers. At the daily briefing in Abuja, the chairman of the PTF notes that some of the returnees are allowing family members and friends to visit them in their hotels, thereby exposing more people to the risk of infection. Meanwhile, the Director General of the Nigeria Center for Disease Control insists on the need to deepen global consultations for a cure.
Honorable Ministers.
Members of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 arriving for the daily update on the national response to the pandemic.
SGF.
The chairman of the task force begins his remarks by decrying the conduct of some Nigeria returnees in the isolation centers, just as the Minister of Health also give update on their testing.
The Presidential Task Force is saddened by the conduct of some of the returnees who failed to adhere to the conditions attached to the quarantine. I strongly urge them to obey the rules in the facilities and also urge their friends and relations to recognize the contagious nature of the disease by desisting from visiting them.
The returnees from Dubai and from the UK and from the US, they are still within their 14 days of quarantine. There is no report or no result yet. They are still under observation. After 10 days or 11 days, they will have tests done, and that test will show who is positive and who is not. So it's a routine process they are under now, routine quarantine that goes for 14 days.
The call to look inwards for a solution to the pandemic has more than ever before resounded in the last few weeks after the Madagascar cure was publicized. However, the task force notes that local efforts for a cure should be complemented by international collaboration.
And there's nothing more important that we should do than look inwards. But we must also remember that this is not a Nigerian outbreak. It's a global outbreak. And we have to engage globally. You know, the end of this outbreak will come when we get a vaccine. But getting a vaccine doesn't mean inevitably that we will have access to it. So we have to engage globally to insist on equitable access to these vaccines when they are developed. We must fight to have more access to therapeutics, to medical countermeasures, and to everything we need to fight this disease way into the future.
The task force also gives further update on the whereabouts of the Chinese medical team in Nigeria and the shipment of the Madagascar cure to the country.
I want to explain, first of all, that I think not all of them were doctors, and I think that I heard that some of them are technicians, but they are staff of CCCC. The Minister of Health is not their host, and I think they are on the company visa. So I'm very happy if you don't ask me about where they are, because they're not really our guests in that sense. But we have been able to learn some things from them by interacting with them from their experience in their country.
Nigeria did not ask. The Madagascar government decided to airlift quantities meant for the African countries. That of West Africa was taken to Guinea-Bissau. But the impression out there is as if we abandoned homegrown solution and we were looking for Madagascar solution. We didn't ask for it.
For over 1 month, the task force has been coordinating the national response to the pandemic, issuing guidelines targeted at reducing the spread of the disease.
In part 2, after the break, are Lagosians complying with a directive on physical distancing in banks? It appears crowd control is still a major challenge. We'll find out soon, in a moment. Do join us again. Welcome back. If you've just joined us, you're watching the news at 10 on Channels Television, coming to you live from Lagos. A reminder of our top stories. President Muhammadu Buhari meets service chiefs over rising insecurity in some parts of the country, gives assurance of safety of lives and property. Stop violating quarantine guidelines. That's the message from the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 to Nigerian returnees undergoing 14 days mandatory quarantine. Kano State is not leaving anything to chance. Quarantines over 2,000 Almajiri as more concerns grow over their COVID-19 status. And global COVID-19 death toll passes 300,000, with number of confirmed cases across the world surpassing 4.4 million. Our website, channelstv.com, has more information on our top stories and others. Subscribe and watch Channels Television's live stream on YouTube and other social media platforms using your mobile device browser. Or you can download the Channels TV app for Android and iOS devices from their respective stores. You can also watch us via your smart TV platforms on Apple, Android TV, Fire and Roku TV as well. Nigerians waiting to be evacuated from Canada may have to wait a bit longer, as the Minister of Foreign Affairs says the Nigerian carrier contracted to do the job has been refused landing rights by the Canadian Civil Authority. Mr. Jeffrey Onyama gave this clarification at the daily briefing by the Presidential Task Force in Abuja. He, however, maintains that negotiations are ongoing with the Canadian government for a waiver.
The Canadian government denied landing rights on the grounds that this particular carrier, Nigerian carrier, did not have a license to undertake commercial flights to that country, and was not known to that country for commercial flights. Our ambassador, our high commissioner in Canada, is engaging with the Canadian government on this issue, and we are hopeful that we can have the decision reversed. The argument that he's putting forward, which is a strong argument, is that this is not a regular commercial flight to Canada for, to take passengers, but that this is an emergency flight and that there is a difference between the two. So the negotiations are ongoing, and we hope that there will be a positive result.
In the meantime, the presidency has been speaking on the measures taken by President Muhammadu Buhari to mitigate the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the lives of Nigerians. A statement from the president's spokesman, Mr. Femi Adesina, outlined some of the president's initiatives, to include the setting up of an economic team headed by the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning to examine the impact of COVID-19 on the economy. Also, an Economic Sustainability Committee headed by the Vice President has been set up to define a post-COVID-19 economy for Nigeria, as well as a task force on free movement of farm products headed by the Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development. He adds that there are plans to tackle weak health systems and infrastructure through the establishment of standard laboratories, intensive care units and isolation centers in all states of the Federation. A fiscal sustainability plan to complement the range of monetary and banking interventions was recently announced by the Central Bank of Nigeria, while a mass agriculture program is also to be put in place. And for the Vice President, the coronavirus pandemic offers an opportunity for the Nigerian people and the government to have a reset in critical sectors of the economy and social services. Professor Yemi Osinbajo offered this suggestion at a virtual launch of the Nigeria Solidarity Support Fund, an initiative of the Nigeria Sovereign Investment Authority and other partners. The Vice President, who joined the event online from his office, acknowledged that the pandemic has affected the lives and livelihoods of Nigerians in different ways, and only a collaborative effort can defeat it. On the NSSF launched by the NSIA and the Global Citizen, he said the fund will provide immediate support to Nigeria's most vulnerable communities. Cutting physical presence in banks is one of the precautionary measures set to curb the spread of COVID-19, as banks now run skeletal operations with restricted access into the banking hall. But since banks reopened earlier in May, many of them seem to be having problems with crowd control. In this special report, our correspondent Dare Idowu examines the situation in the banking environment.
If you've ever used the tally number at the bank, you would understand the pain that came with it while it lasted. Now, this pool of people at the bank and how they access banking services in this pandemic period is a reminder of the old-fashioned traditional banking system. This handwritten number is their access key into the banking hall. It is on a first-come, first-served basis, but the waiting period is the problem. We monitored the process through Tolu Animashaun. A bank customer is only here to present a check. He has his number and waiting for his turn. While they wait, tempers flare. Some disgruntled customers react. After 2 hours, Tolu gets to go in. He shares his experience.
A hectic situation, being able to do any transactions in the bank. You have to come in here, pick a number, depending on what you want to do in the bank. And it's been hell, to be sincere. Necessary evil, I guess, because I've had to wait about 2 hours just to drop a check. The advice I would give anyone, if you do not have a pending need to come to the bank, don't just come to the bank.
Financial institutions are adjusting their style of operations to enable transactions and continuity of trade, especially after the lockdown. In the process, they are also expected to pay attention to government measures to curb the spread of COVID-19. But situations seen across banks in the country has raised some questions whether the style of operation they have adopted is fit for purpose.
ATM, mobile apps, quick codes and other self-service digital platforms have come to the rescue in decongesting banking halls, but there are still some customer service-related issues a digitized process is yet to solve.
People who have negative transactions, if for instance you're trying to withdraw from the ATM, you get debited, and then the reversal. Some banks have it, some banks are better than some, whereby you have reversal in minutes. Some you have to call and it will tell you, give us seven working days to rectify it. I believe that technology should be able to solve that problem.
The service gap in the banking space may have widened over time, but kept within the banking operational confines. But with COVID-19 in the picture, new challenges are born and perhaps a good time for new customer-oriented innovation and transformation. Dare Idowu, Channels Television News.
Let's cross over to Abuja now, and here's Ibrahim Adra. Ibrahim.
Hello, Ijoma. The issue of the Almajiri system is still very much on the front burner as Kano State government has put in quarantine over 2,000 Almajiri to curb the spread of COVID-19 in the state. A senior special assistant to the governor confirmed to Channels Television that a team of rapid response experts have been trained to manage the Almajiri at the quarantine centers. He says the trainees were selected from medical doctors, nurses, community health workers and laboratory scientists to test and screen the Almajiri at their camps in Kiru, Gabasawa and Karai local government areas. Those who test positive for the virus are to be taken to isolation centers for treatment, while those that are negative would be returned to their homes and reunited with their parents. On his part, Governor Abdullahi Ganduje asked the trainees to perform above expectations, noting that no amount of allowance could match their reward for service to humanity. Meanwhile, 22 of the 132 Almajiri of Gombe State origin evacuated from Adamawa State recently have tested negative to COVID-19 and have been reunited with their families. The children had been quarantined at a facility in Amada, as is the standard procedure for all returnees before being released. They were given clothes as well as school bags and other materials in preparation for being enrolled in formal education system. Over 400 Almajiri from different parts of Adamawa State to be evacuated to northern states.
In students under the tutelage of Malams in Adamawa State. But with the recent decision of the Northern Governors Forum to eradicate the Almajiri system in the north, they have to be sent to their respective states. 132 of them are being repatriated to Gombe State, which is also in the northeastern region. They are just a third of the total number of those to be moved out of Adamawa State, as the state chairman of the COVID-19 Containment Committee reiterates the state government's commitment to the reintegration of the Almajiri project in the state.
But every single Almajiri that is not an indigene of Adamawa State, we are ready to receive every single Almajiri from any part of the world that is our indigene, because we have a responsibility to cater for every indigene of this state for as long as he is within our boundaries.
The boys arrive in Gombe State and are received at the quarantine camp. They are to be accommodated here while their health status is determined.
We received 132 and they are going for the test. After the test, if we have anyone that have any case of COVID-19, we can evacuate it to the isolation treatment center in Gombe State. And the remaining ones, we can go carry and take them for the quarantine for 2 weeks. If there is no any issue, we can go for second samples so that to give the confirmation of this second test of this COVID-19.
11 of them are going back to Kwame, 11 are going back to Yamal Tudeba, and all these local governments are our catchment areas. So I can tell you that even once they are back home, we'll be there with them and they will integrate proper within the society, as the Honorable Commissioner has said.
The quarantine camp has an education scheme which is expected to extend to local government areas to accommodate the children when they are reunited with their families.
In a related development, most of the over 157 Almajiri schools built by the federal government under President Goodluck Jonathan have now been handed over to states and some Islamic scholars to manage. That's according to the Minister of State for Education, Mr. Chukwuemeka Nwajioba. The minister stated this while fielding questions from journalists at the daily news briefing by the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 in Abuja. According to him, some state governors have also changed the use of these schools to address other most pressing needs of the states.
157 such schools were built a few years back. Within the first part of this administration, the Honorable Minister of Education, Malam Adamu Adamu, began the process of getting different state governments and Islamic scholars to take over these schools. And some governors have requested to change their purpose in Gombe. I also agreed with the governor to turn one of them into a college of education. We are working with all state governors and all sects in the north who may want to use these facilities. They're all available, and we are continuously engaging with them to either improve them or use them in the best way possible. So they are not a waste. And the money that had been spent, maybe you may have issues with how it was spent, but those facilities are there, and we are now putting them into use. We hope that with what has now happened with taking off some of our children off the streets, and then finding a way to progress them into and mainstream them into formal system, we can then use most of those facilities.
And that's all from Abuja. But when the news at 10 returns, we'll bring you more updates on COVID-19. Plus, OPEC and China commit to working together to stabilize global oil market from the impact of COVID-19. That's on Business News. Join us again.
Welcome back to the news at 10. The founder of Dar Communications, Chief Raymond Dokwesi, has been discharged from the isolation center in Abuja. Chief Dokwesi, his daughter-in-law, and 6 members of his family had tested positive for coronavirus. He was conveyed by the NCDC to the isolation center at the University of Abuja Teaching Hospital, Wagwalada, for treatment on May the 1st. Chief Dokwesi indicated that he was asymptomatic at the time. Also discharged from hospital is the Emir of Daura, Umar Farouk Umar, after undergoing treatment in intensive care for 10 days. The Emir was moved out of the palace in Daura to Katsina town, where he was admitted and taken into intensive care after showing symptoms of COVID-19. While President Muhammadu Buhari has sent him a congratulatory message for his speedy recovery, he also commended the commitment of all health workers on the front line at this time. The Lagos state government has clarified that the death of a returnee from Dubai recently is not as a result of COVID-19 related causes. Offering an explanation on his Twitter handle, the Commissioner for Health, Professor Akin Abayomi, says the victim was one of the returnees who were placed in a COVID-19 isolation program in Lekki pending confirmation by COVID-19 gold standard test. He said the definitive COVID-19 gold standard test has turned out to be negative for COVID-19 infection, and his death is no longer considered to have been attributable to COVID-19. Meanwhile, the state government has discharged 13 more COVID-19 patients after being treated for COVID-19. The state governor, Babajide Sanwo-Olu, who announced this in a statement, explains that 11 males and 2 females, all Nigerians, were discharged from the Yaba and Lagos University Teaching Hospital isolation facilities. And over in the east, Anambra State Governor Willie Obiano has confirmed a second COVID-19 case in the state. Governor Obiano announced the new case at a press conference held in his country home, Aguleri, Anambra East local government area today. The governor explained that the new case returned from Kano on May the 6th after a short business trip.
Our beloved state recorded a new case of COVID-19 yesterday. The new case returned from Kano on the 6th of May after a short business trip. It is saddening that despite our efforts to tighten security at the boundaries, this new case was able to sneak back into Anambra State after a trip to Kano. He is currently receiving attention in our protective care center. His residence has been sealed off, and we have commenced aggressive contact tracing to minimize the wave of community spread that might arise from the case. Anambra, I urge you to be calm as COVID-19 task force is on top of the situation to ensure that this threat is quickly contained.
24 girls reportedly trafficked from Akwa Ibom State to Lagos have been rescued by the police in the Agege area of the state. The girls, whose ages are between 13 and 22, lived in shanties where they were reportedly being patronized. The police also arrested 4 men suspected to have brought them to Lagos. It was gathered that during the investigation, one of the girls was traced to the shanties in Agege, where she was engaged as a commercial sex worker. And messages of felicitation have been pouring in for the new Chief of Staff to the President, Professor Ibrahim Gambari. One of these is from the governor of his home state, Kwara, Abdul Rahman Abdul Razak, who congratulated Professor Gambari on his appointment. Governor Abdul Razak describes it as a befitting development that is rooted in dedication, loyalty, and history. According to the governor, Professor Gambari has always been one of the president's men for decades, and it's not surprising that he's been appointed at this crucial moment to serve as his chief of staff. We commend Mr. President for yet again honoring not just one of his renowned loyalists of all time, but also the people of Kwara State. The governor also prayed for God's protection on the new chief of staff. Let's cross over and look at some business news. Here's Kayode Okikiolu.
Banking, so easy, so simple. Dial *894# now to experience it. You first, First Bank.
Many thanks, Ejima, and you're welcome to Business News. A delegation from the People's Republic of China have met with top officials from the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, led by its Secretary General Mohammed Barkindo. The milestone meeting, which was held today via webinar, discussed the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the economy and oil market, as well as plans to strengthen collaboration between OPEC and China. Both delegations commended the efforts in handling and containing the pandemic, while Mr. Barkindo acknowledged that the country remains OPEC's and the world's biggest importer of crude oil. Meanwhile, the Chinese delegation say their country is already on the road to recovery and hopes to regain its former energy consumption patterns very soon, which will help support the oil industry. Meanwhile, oil prices surged on Thursday after the International Energy Agency forecasts lower global stockpiles in the second half of this year, even as worries remain over a second coronavirus infection surge in the coming months. Global oil price benchmark Brent crude futures jumped 6.65% to settle at $31.13 per barrel, while its counterpart, that's the US WTI, climbed higher by 8.98% to $27.57 per barrel. The market rebounded from Wednesday's losses following a grim forecast by the U.S. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, who warned of an extended period of weak growth for the world's biggest economy. And the Bank of Industry, BOI, has donated 20 million naira to support palliative arrangement for vulnerable citizens in Kano State. The state's Commissioner for Information, Mr. Muhammad Garba, says the grant by BOI was made to the fundraising committee on COVID-19, who have been mandated to gather the donations for distribution to the less privileged in the state to cushion the effect of the lockdown. Last month, the foremost development finance institution joined other corporates and philanthropists in supporting the fight against COVID-19 in Nigeria through the donation of 700 million in relief funding. More stories now. Sectoral distribution shows that a total of 338.94 billion naira was generated as value-added tax in the first quarter of 2020, and this represents 15.66% increase year-on-year. According to data provided by the Federal Inland Revenue Service and verified by the National Bureau of Statistics, professional services generated the highest amount of VAT with 38.30 billion naira. It is closely followed by manufacturing with 37.37 billion naira, while commercial and trading generated 17.19 billion naira. Out of the total amount generated, 172.67 billion naira was generated as non-import VAT locally, while 93.67 billion naira was generated as non-import VAT for foreign. The balance of 72.59 billion naira was generated as Nigeria Customs Service import VAT. And over to the NSE, where nearly 85 billion naira is gained at the close of today's trading on the local stock exchange amid improved turnover in the volume of shares transaction. Let's join Temple Ashaju for a summary of today's activity.
Thank you for joining us on the Stock Market Report. The stock market maintained uptrend at the close of Thursday's trading session by 77 basis points as investors rushed to meet the qualification dates for two key dividend-paying stocks of Dangote Cement and Nestle PLC. Now, the interest in Nestle PLC follows the need to meet Friday's deadline in order to qualify for a 45 naira dividend payout. And this propped up the consumer goods indices, which gains the most by 1.51%. Now, the banks also shared in the gains of the market, enough for Zenith Bank to close with the largest volume of transactions. Total volume for the session jumped by 14%, while the value of transactions rose by 51%. And in the face of COVID-19, the pharmaceuticals seem to be taking the center stage with Fitsin and May & Baker, which comes after one of the key companies gaining more lately. But Custodian Investment PLC was the top loser for the day. And that's the Stock Market Report. I'm Temple Ashaju.
Thank you, Temple. Well, outside the country, stocks on Wall Street ended Thursday's trading session over an hour ago in positive territory as gains from bank stocks, oil prices, as well as other issues raised investors' sentiment at the close of session. Well, let's find out how other major Business News Tonight. I am Kayode Okikelu. The news at 10 continues with Ijeoma.
Banking so easy, so simple. Dial *894# now to experience it. You first, First Bank.
Federal lawmakers have asked the executive arm of government to ensure that the interests of Nigerians remain protected in the proposed cut to the 2020 national budget. This call comes from the President of the Senate, Ahmed Lawan, during a meeting of the leadership of the National Assembly with the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning. The meeting, presided over by the Senate President and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Femi Gbajabiamila, had in attendance principal officers from both chambers. Lawmakers were briefed by the Finance Minister, Zainab Ahmed, on the plan by the federal government to amend the 10.59 trillion naira 2020 budget passed by the National Assembly in December last year. Senator Lawan also said the legislature is willing to consider the proposed amendments to the 2020 budget, which the minister said will be presented to the National Assembly next week. Still ahead on the news at 10, global COVID-19 death toll passes 300,000, with number of confirmed cases across the world surpassing 4.4 trillion. We'll have this and more from our London studios in Around the World in 5. Please stay with us. Welcome back. A quick look at the southeast now. In Anambra State, traditional rulers have raised an alarm over the rising number of Almajiri arriving in the southeast. In a communique after a meeting in Awka, the state capital, the chairman of the Council of Traditional Rulers, Obi of Onisha, Nnemeka Achebe, described the situation as worrisome. According to the monarchs, what's giving them cause for concern is that many of the Almajiri might have already been infected with COVID-19 before their arrival in the southeast. The royal fathers are asking the governors in the region to ensure that the Almajiri are not allowed to enter their states, since they would not fit into the economic, social and cultural environment. More than 300,000 people around the world have died from the coronavirus, and that's according to data from the Johns Hopkins University, which also says that more than 4.4 million people have been infected with the disease. Here's Simon Pusey with more international news in Around the World in 5.
Hello and good evening from the Channel studios here in London with your international news around the world in 5. The World Health Organization has warned that a mental illness crisis is looming as millions of people worldwide are surrounded by death and disease and forced into isolation. According to a report of the WHO's Mental Health Department, the common situation of isolation, fear, uncertainty and economic turmoil across the world could be the cause of a worldwide upsurge in the number and severity of mental illnesses. The UN has reported that governments should put the issue front and centre of their responses. Emerging studies and surveys are already showing COVID-19's impact on mental health globally. China's foreign ministry has said that the country opposes what it calls slander from the United States after US officials said Chinese-linked hackers broke into US COVID-19 research. In a joint statement, the FBI and the American Department of Homeland Security said they were investigating digital break-ins at US organizations by China-linked cyber actors suspected of trying to obtain public health data and studies related to vaccines, treatments and testing. The Chinese embassy in Washington condemned the allegations as lies. Spain's daily coronavirus death toll has risen above 200 for the first time since May the 8th. The Spanish Health Ministry reported 217 people had died overnight, bringing the overall death toll from the disease to over 27,000. Preliminary results from a nationwide coronavirus antibody study show that about 5% of the overall Spanish population had contracted the virus, about 10 times more than the tally of diagnosed cases suggests. Burundi has expelled its country's head of the World Health Organization during a presidential election campaign in which large rallies are being held. Burundi is expelling its national head of the WHO at a time when politicians are pressing ahead with large election rallies despite warnings against mass gatherings. In 2018, UN investigators probing allegations of rights abuses were kicked out of the country. The United Nations has previously accused security personnel and a ruling party militia of organizing gang rapes, torture and killings in the country. In Kenya, truck drivers taking the Kenya-Tanzania route are complaining of massive delays at the Namanga border point due to COVID-19 screening and certification. A few days ago, Kenya ramped up its surveillance at the Tanzanian border after 14 cases had been recorded at the crossing. However, this caused massive delays and bureaucratic problems for trans-border workers, such as truck drivers. Kenya has reported 715 cases and 36 coronavirus deaths, while Tanzania has confirmed 509 cases and 21 deaths, but the government has been criticised for not providing regular updates on the status of the outbreak. In Afghanistan, a truck packed with explosives has killed at least 5 people in an attack claimed by Taliban insurgents. The truck exploded in the eastern city of Gardez, wounding at least 15 civilians. That's according to the Afghan Defense Ministry. The explosion comes 2 days after at least 56 people were killed in attacks elsewhere in the country, including women and newborn babies, dealing a setback to peace plans in the war-ravaged nation. In Germany, a spectacular controlled explosion has brought down 2 cooling towers of a disused nuclear plant in the southern town of Philipsburg. Germany took another step towards completing its withdrawal from nuclear power, leaving half a dozen plants still to close over the next 2 years. Greenpeace has welcomed the destruction, saying it should stand as a symbol to turn from outdated energy supply to renewables. And finally, volunteers across the Algerian capital, Algiers, are cooking meals and packaging food items to be distributed to families in need throughout the month of Ramadan. With many Algerians hit hard by the impact of the disease, charity workers have taken meals on the road, delivering hot food and other necessities to people's homes or places of work. The Nas Al Khair charity workers say they distribute over 1,000 meals a day, while representatives of the Algerian Food Bank say their packages have reached 19,000 families since the beginning of Ramadan. And that's your international news around the world in 5. Now back to the Channel studios in Lagos.
Thanks a lot, Simon. Just to say quickly that the Kaduna state government has discharged 35 additional Almajiri from its isolation camp. Just keeping an eye on the figures and the numbers there. You do remember that most of those children were put in isolation pending COVID-19 tests. But just say at the moment that the Kaduna state government has discharged 35 additional Almajiri from its isolation camp. From there, let's take a look at some sports. Here's Olumide Macaulay.
Thank you, Joma. Hello and welcome to Sports News. The International Olympic Committee is expected to bear costs of up to $800 million for its part in the organization of the postponed Tokyo Olympics, now to be staged next year owing to the coronavirus pandemic. IOC President Thomas Bach says that $650 million will go towards the organization of the Games in 2021 and $150 million to support international federations and national Olympic committees. The figure announced by Bach does not include any costs Tokyo Games organized by and the Japanese government have to incur by the 12-month delay of the world's biggest multi-sports event. The Premier League plans to resume this season in June, has been given a boost after the Secretary of the State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, Oliver Dowden, says the government is opening the door for football to return in June. Dowden held a positive meeting with football authorities, which included the Premier League, the English Football League and the Football Association to progress plans for football to resume. While the government has given its go-ahead, Dowden said it was not up to football authorities to finalize the details of how they will proceed, with the government offering guidance. The Premier League has begun planning for matches to be played behind doors, and closed doors, that is, and players may return to training next week. The Italian Football Federation has announced that the Federal Prosecutor's Office will investigate and verify if Serie A clubs are working in line with the health protocol approved by the government. Reports say Lazio is arranging 3 aside matches at the end of each session, and the FIGC has assigned the Federal Prosecutor's Office to inspect the teams in the league. According to the Football Federation, a task force reporting directly to the prosecutor will ascertain if the training sessions of the clubs that are currently individual and from May the 18th in groups are carried out in accordance with indicated protocol. Staying with football, Turkish club Besiktas has confirmed that their club president and 8 members of the first team squad have tested positive for COVID-19. The club announced that President Ahmed Sibi had contracted the virus and that further blanket tests across the entire squad and club employees flagged up 8 positive results. The club said the affected persons have been quarantined in line with medical protocol, as the Turkish Super League is expected to resume on June the 12th. That's Sports News. Ijoma, back to you.
Thanks a lot, Olumide. And the main news again. President Muhammadu Buhari today met with service chiefs over the rising insecurity in some parts of the country. The president also gave the assurance of safety of lives and property. Also today, the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 told Nigerian returnees undergoing 14-day mandatory quarantine in Abuja to stop violating the quarantine guidelines. And the global COVID-19 death toll passed 300,000 today, with the number of confirmed cases across the world surpassing 4.4 million. That's the news at 10 tonight. Thanks a lot for staying with us. I'm Ijoma Onyato. Do stay safe out there, and good night.